I am, as you know, a Brooklynite, born and bred, a first-generation American on my father's side, barely second generation on my mother's. Neither of my parents had the means to attend college. What has become of me could happen only in America, like so many others. I owe so much to the entry this nation afforded to people yearning to breathe free.
Well, Justice Ginsburg was a truly remarkable woman. There were others of her generation who were equally remarkable. In her case, I think we celebrate her because she took her talents and she specifically targeted trying to expand opportunities for women in the 1970s and was wildly successful at doing that. And then, of course, she was appointed to the Supreme Court and became a really important justice on our Supreme Court. But her journey begins in Harvard Law School. She goes there with her husband. He is super supportive of her becoming a lawyer. He thought, she says in the interview I did with her that's in our book, he's the first person I dated who cared I had a brain. And that really is the story of this great love affair that was fundamentally predicated upon deep respect for one another. And I think that was one of the many things that made their partnership so special, and also was a huge part of, and she says this in the interview I did of her, it was a huge part of how she was able to do what she did, because a lot of men of Marty Ginsburg's generation did not support women in the same way. And so they're in law school and it's a very difficult period. Marty has cancer and they have a young child. And somehow in the midst of all of this, she winds up eventually graduating tied for first in her class at Columbia, which is just an astounding thing when you think about it. I think going to law school with small children must be very difficult. I had a hard time in law school and I was single. I didn't have kids. I didn't have any illness. I didn't have a partner who was potentially going to die. She had so many things that were sources of stress and really pulling at her time and her energy. And yet through all of that, she rose to the very top. That being said, when she graduated from Columbia, and there's a story about why she didn't graduate from Harvard, she takes her Columbia degree and no law firm in New York would hire her. And as she tells it, it was because she had three strikes. She was a woman, she was a mother, and she was Jewish. And when you put those together, nobody would hire her. A firm that she had spent a summer working at told her, sorry, we already have our one woman, Polly Murray, a very famous woman of the same generation. And so we're good. We've got one. And she's African-American, so it's a bonus, right? That's how the law firms thought about it at that time. And so she had to sort of regroup. And I think, we're all the beneficiaries that she did, because she might have gone to a law firm and spent her whole career there. But instead, she had to regroup and think about a different path. And her story is also a story of important mentors. Her law professor, her constitutional law professor at Columbia, helped her get a clerkship. He went to a friend who was a prominent New York judge and said, hire her. And the judge said, I don't know about that. She's got a young child. And the professor, Gerald Gunther, said, if you don't hire her, I'm never sending you another clerk from Columbia, from the school from which the judge hired all of his clerks. And so that's how she got her clerkship. And then Gunther helped get her an academic fellowship. And that launched her on the path to become a professor. She starts at Rutgers. She eventually comes to Columbia to join him. And so he's a huge figure in her life. He winds up testifying when she's nominated to the Supreme Court. And I share all of that because I think that probably fed into why she was such a great mentor. And she was so great about helping her clerks win jobs and opportunities and helping open doors for us. She definitely herself had the pay it forward mentality. But then, she goes and she becomes a professor and very quickly pivots from the study of procedure which was always a passion and love of hers and is so, so important in terms of the fundamental integrity of the legal system. But she pivots and starts focusing on gender. And she does it for a lot of reasons. I think one of the reasons she cited publicly often was her students came to her, particularly her female students, and said, we want a class on gender in the law. But separately, she was also watching the world around her and seeing a lot of injustice. And then finally, I think she recognized, not in an arrogant way, but in a very humble way, that she had tremendous talent. And she wanted to use that talent for the benefit of others, to make society better, to make society more equal. And so this is how the legend of Ruth Bader Ginsburg starts to develop, because she then takes those talents and she founds the Women's Rights Project at the ACLU. She begins litigating these cases. She argues a number of cases in the Supreme Court. She files briefs in, say, 24, maybe 20 plus cases. She wins most of the cases in which she argues and files briefs and/or files briefs. And by the, this all starts in the beginning of the 1970s. By 1980, when she's put on the DC Circuit as a judge by President Jimmy Carter, the legal landscape with respect to gender in this country was completely different. And in keeping with that, so was the social landscape. And what that meant for women of my generation and the following generations, I was born in the 1970s, is that we were born into a completely different society. We were born into society that opened up, or had opened up, endless opportunities for us. When by the time we go to college, there is, at least on the books, maybe not always in practice, equal funding for women's sports. All of these changes all derive from the 1970s. There's so many extraordinary opportunities that she and the cohort of women and male allies who were litigating and lobbying and moving for change at that time, they accomplished so much. And so I've long said that if she had never been on the Supreme Court, I think we would still be talking about her just as much as we have been in the last few years.